Wanted to share a dream that I had with you guys. I had a dream, and when I woke up, I could remember every detail clearly. I could remember every event that took place. It was almost like I was there, like I personally went through it, like I had experienced it for myself. It was almost like a vision, and I know that God is giving us more and more dreams during these times. And what I dreamt about was I dreamt about Christians, and it was during the end times, and I saw them being persecuted and martyred because of their faith in Jesus Christ. And I specifically had a dream about a certain passage in the Bible, and the passage was Revelations chapter 20, verse 4. So I'm going to go ahead and read that to you. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony about Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast nor his image, and not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands. And they came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So that is what I dreamt about. That's what I saw in my dream. So I'll go ahead and just get straight into the dream. There was a whole group of us, and we were out in the middle of the wilderness. And it was me, my mom, and my uncle, who are both Christians. But most of the people in our group didn't have any family members with them. They were just there on their own. And it was kind of like we had all banded together. And so we're walking through the wilderness, and really it was like a desolate prairie. There was no trees, no roads, no vegetation, no greenery. It was just dirt everywhere. It was like dry land. I remember we were all fatigued. We were all tired. We were all weak. I was holding on to my mom and my uncle just to hold myself up. We were kind of like leaning on each other for support. We were so weak. And we all looked just kind of downtrodden as we're walking. Our faces were dirty. Our clothes were hanging off of our bodies because we were malnourished. There was no more pigmentation left in our shirts. It was all just faded to gray. So it was almost like you get the feeling that we'd been out in the elements for a really long time. We're just walking and walking, and it feels like we had been walking for days and days. And finally, we come to the outskirts of this old remnant of a town. But the only thing left standing in this town that seems to be like in the middle of nowhere is this very large white building. And it looks like it had previously been a white church. And I get the feeling that society has totally collapsed. Like civilization and the way we're used to living in the world is no longer taking place. And so as we start getting closer and closer to this old church, we see men with armed weapons. And we all start getting scared. We're all afraid. We all start, kind of like shaking and looking at each other. And, we're like, oh my gosh, this isn't good. This isn't good. But we know we can't go back into the wilderness because there's no food, there's no water, and there's no shelter. It's like we're at the end of our road. And so we decide to continue on towards this building. And I remember my mom and myself and my uncle climbing the stairs of this church. And there's these two big double doors that open up. And as we walk inside, it looks like this huge stadium, or maybe even like a movie theater. And there's a stage in the front, and then there's those red cloth pop-up fold-out seats that you would see if you were going to see a movie. And so we all start taking our seats, and I'm sitting next to my mom, and she turns to me and she squeezes my arm, and it's almost like she's just giving me emotional support. And she just looks at me. She doesn't say anything. She just looks at me, and her eyes start filling up with tears. She just starts welling up with these tears, and it's just grief and pain on her face. It's almost like she's telling me with her eyes, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry it's come to this, that we had to go through this. And all of a sudden at the front of the stage, this black curtain goes up. And as it goes up, we see the Antichrist sitting in the middle of the stage. And as people turn and look and see this and realize what's going on and that it's Satan himself standing there, they start screaming and hollering, and the whole stadium is in complete uproar. People are horrified. People are crying, they're screaming, they're weeping, they're wailing. It's just horrific. He looks like a beast. He looks like half man and half beast. And he's wearing this dark gray, tailored, expensive looking suit. And he starts pointing to people in the audience and he tells them to come up. And when he tells you to come up, it's like he has this strange power over you. You have no choice but to come up. And people do. They start coming up from their seats and approaching the stage. And he's standing next to these 3 black chairs that look like massage chairs. And he puts them in these chairs, and there's this black kind of like iron bar that comes across them and clanks shut, and they can't move. The next thing you know, this guillotine comes down and it cuts off their heads right in front of us. They are facing us, and they're having their heads chopped off right in front of us. All we can do is watch in horror and in shock. We're watching this execution of people, this extermination of Christians. And he's standing there, and it's like he's indignant, like he's irritated with us, like we're inconveniencing him somehow. And then he opens these chairs up after he's cut their heads off, and he kind of like kicks them out of the chair, and they start piling up on the stage, and then he drags them over to the side of the stage. And then he calls up more people to come up in the chair. And so I start freaking out. I'm losing faith, and I'm losing hope. And I'm asking God, where are you? Where are you, God? God, help us. He's killing us. He's killing us. God, how can this be happening right now? How can you allow this to happen to us? How can you let us go through this? We had already been through so much, so many trials and struggles already. And all of that has just led to this point in time. I just couldn't believe it. It felt like the enemy had won, like the enemy was in control. We were completely defeated. And I felt hopeless. I felt hopeless. I had no faith. I had no hope. And I'm calling out to God, and I'm calling out to God. And I felt like he left me. I felt like he abandoned me. I felt like he wasn't walking with me anymore. And I just kept crying and crying and crying out to him. God, please, where are you? Where are you? How can this be happening? Have you left me? Where are you? God, I need you. And my eye kept going to this column out of the corner of my eye. It kept catching my eye. And it didn't look unusual. It looked like it was just a part of the church, a structural piece, a support beam, or maybe even just a column to add to the beautification. But as I looked at this column, I saw Jesus Christ standing there. He had a really long white robe on, and there was light coming off of him. And he was like 20 feet tall. He was so tall. I remember I couldn't believe how tall he was. And I tried to look up towards where his face would be, and my eye just kept seeing more and more and more robe because he was so tall. And he was holding up the church. He was holding up the roof. He had his arms outstretched. And there was white light everywhere from him. And I couldn't see his face. Couldn't make out any details or features. All I could see is this bright white light coming off of him. And he said to me, he said to my spirit, he said, I am here. I am here. I am with you. I have not left you. I will never leave you. I will not leave you. I am here. He just kept reassuring me. And he said, I am holding things together. And I looked at him, and he had his hands out. They were reached out. He was holding the church up, holding things together. And he said, I am with you. Don't think this is by accident. Don't think that I've left you. He said, don't fear. I am with you. And it was almost like he was telling me that this is no strange thing. He has not handed me over to the enemy. The enemy has not won. even though it looks like he's in control. God is the one who's in control of everything. Nothing happens outside of God's will, his sovereign will. And it was like he was saying, this has to happen. It's written. This has to come to pass. And you're here for a purpose. This is supposed to be happening to you. You're supposed to be going through this. And I remember feeling like he was saying, I'm going to be with you every step of the way. And after this happens, that I'm going to be in heaven with him for all eternity. Like he told me where I was going after this. And so that I didn't have to fear. And I remember looking around and nobody else could see him. I think Jesus holding up the church was very symbolic and very significant because he speaks in symbolism. And I find it interesting that Christians are said to be the church. And Christians, all of us, were inside a church. And Jesus Christ was holding up the church, literally. It was almost like he was holding up his body. He was supporting us. He was holding all things together. So I felt peace come over me. I felt peace in my spirit, peace in my mind. My faith was restored. I realized that Jesus Christ was right next to us and walking with us, and I was no longer afraid. And so I looked towards the front of the stage, and Satan was mocking the Christians. He was saying, "Who's next? Who wants to volunteer to come up next?" And so I got out of my seat and I started walking towards the stage, and I felt like I can do this. I can give my life for Jesus Christ, and to die for him was an honor and a privilege. But as I got closer and closer to the chair, I felt my courage start to wax and wane, and I called on God and I said, "God, I can't do this without you." I was so terrified. My legs were shaking. I thought I was going to faint. I was so scared. I was just shaking. And I said, "God, I need your help. I can't do this without you. Please help me, Jesus." And I remember that he restored courage and faith back into my spirit. And I did not muster up this strength from within myself. It did not come from me. I remember knowing that he had imparted this to me. It was his supernatural grace that allowed me to keep going and to put myself in the chair. And when I did, the bar came down and it clanked shut, and it felt so final. It was so terrifying hearing that final clanking. And I remember squirming. I was squirming in my seat. I was squirming in my mind. I was just completely terrified. And I remember just praying the whole time through it and just talking to God. And then, the blade came down. It cut off my head. And that was it. I woke up. And when I woke up, I remembered everything perfectly. I remembered every detail. There's a time coming where we're not going to be able to be lukewarm. We're not going to be able to straddle the fence any longer. We're going to have to make a choice. We're going to have to decide if we're going to obey God's law or if we're going to obey the law of the land, because that day is coming, and the world, the enemy, is not going to let us do both. Revelations 13:17 tells us, "And no one could buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast." That means we won't have money for food. We won't have gasoline for our vehicles. We won't be able to pay our bills. We won't be living in society anymore. We'll probably be more or less criminals on the run. It's not going to be easy to resist under this kind of pressure, especially when you see your children going hungry every day. I think that's why we need to be close to God, is just so that he can give us his strength to endure what we have to endure. And we know that if we do take the mark of the beast, that we'll no longer be able to go to heaven. It'll seal our fate. And we got to remember that everything we go through, all the pain and struggles in this life, is just temporary and is for a short period of time. It's like a blink of an eye compared to all of eternity. And God will be with us. He will be with us through it all. He will never leave us. He will never forsake us. He promises that. And I believe that if we stay close to God, he will protect us and he will guide us and show us where we need to go. I really appreciate you guys watching this video. And if you guys have any comments, I'd love to read them down below. Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate you listening to this video.